At her wedding, her sister stood up and said, "I'm pregnant with your groom's baby." The crowd gasped and she froze in shock. Then her 9-year-old niece stood and said, "That's a lie. I can prove it." The room fell silent, and what followed changed everything. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome to Mr. Peter's Stories. From the first story I ever shared, you have been my heartbeat. You've stood by me through light and shadow, giving me strength when my words felt weak. You are not just my audience. You are my family, my blessing and my purpose. Today I lift my hands in prayer for you. May the Almighty fill your hearts with unshakable peace. Bless every woman with dignity and power, and every man with grace and wisdom. May your homes overflow with love, laughter, and faith. May your children rise with light in their eyes and kindness in their souls. And when life grows heavy, may God's hand lift you higher than your fears. You are loved beyond measure, blessed beyond reason, and never forgotten in my prayers. If your heart is true, like the video, if your love is real, right, I am with Mr. Peter. The last thing Jane remembered before her world shattered was the feeling of lace against her fingertips. Her wedding dress, the one she had dreamed about since childhood, felt impossibly heavy now. The cathedral stretched endlessly before her, filled with faces she barely recognized through the haze of shock. Logan stood at the altar, frozen like a statue carved from ice. His face had drained of all color the moment Opal's voice rang out across the sanctuary. Jane watched his mouth open and close, forming no words, no defense, nothing that could stop the avalanche, destroying everything they had built together. "I'm 12 weeks pregnant with his child." Opal's voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling, each word a knife finding its mark in Jane's chest. Her stepsister stood in the aisle, wearing a cream dress that suddenly seemed chosen with cruel precision. Her hand rested on her stomach in a gesture that looked rehearsed, perfect, devastating. "I'm so sorry, Jane. I never meant for this to happen. But you deserve to know the truth before you marry him." The guests erupted into chaos. Whispers became shouts. Someone's aunt started crying. Jane felt her legs begin to shake, felt the bouquet of white roses slip from her fingers and scatter across the floor. The petals looked like scattered pieces of her heart. She turned to Logan, searching his face for denial, for rage, for anything that would prove this was a nightmare. But he just stood there, paralyzed, his eyes wide with something that looked horribly like guilt. "Say something," Jane whispered, but her voice carried in the sudden silence. "Logan, tell them she's lying." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. That silence confirmed every terrible thing Opal had just said. At least that's what Jane's breaking heart told her. "You bastard!" The scream tore from Jane's throat, raw and animal. She lunged toward Opal without thinking, without planning, driven only by the white-hot fury of betrayal. Her hands reached for her stepsister's perfectly styled hair, her lying face, anything she could destroy the way they had just destroyed her. The wedding guests moved too slowly. Jane's fingers caught in Opal's dress, tearing the delicate fabric. Opal screamed and fell backward into the pews. Jane went down with her, the world reduced to rage and lace, and the sound of fabric ripping. Hands grabbed Jane from behind. Logan's groomsmen, she realized distantly. They pulled her away, while Opal cowered on the floor, playing the victim so convincingly that Jane wanted to scream until her throat bled. "Get off me!" Jane thrashed against them, feeling her own dress tear. The sound of stitches popping seemed impossibly loud. "She's lying! She has to be lying!" But even as she screamed it, doubt crept in like poison. Logan still hadn't spoken. He stood at the altar, looking like a man, watching his own execution, and his silence was the rope around all their necks. Thea appeared from somewhere in the chaos, rushing to Opal's side with maternal concern that looked so genuine it made Jane sick. Her stepmother helped Opal to her feet, checking her for injuries with theatrical worry. "Jane, darling, you need to calm down," Thea said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "This is terrible, I know, but violence isn't the answer." "Don't you dare!" Jane snarled. "Don't you dare act like you care about me." Where were you when she was sleeping with my fiancé?" "I didn't know," Thea said softly. "Oh, sweetheart, if I had known, I would have told you immediately. But Opal just told me this morning. She was so frightened, so ashamed. She wanted to keep it secret. But I convinced her you deserved to know the truth. The way she said it, so reasonable and kind, made Jane feel like she was losing her mind. Everything about this felt wrong, staged, impossible. But Logan's silence kept hammering home the same message. It was true. All of it was true. Jane looked down at her dress. The skirt had torn completely on one side, exposing her leg in a way that felt obscene in this sacred space. Her hair had fallen from its careful updo. She could feel mascara running down her face in black rivers. She looked like exactly what they wanted her to look like, a hysterical, violent woman who couldn't control herself. "I need to leave," Jane heard herself say. Her voice sounded strange, disconnected. "I need to get out of here." She pushed through the grasping hands and stumbling guests, hiking up her ruined dress to run. The cathedral doors seemed miles away. Behind her, she heard Logan finally speak. "Jane, wait, please let me explain." But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. If she stopped moving, she would shatter completely, and she refused to give them that satisfaction. She refused to break in front of everyone who had come to celebrate her happiness. The parking lot stretched before her in the late afternoon sun. Her car was decorated with tin cans and flowers, "Just Married," written across the back window in white paint. The sight of it made something rupture inside her chest. Jane made it 3 more steps before her legs gave out. She collapsed on the hot asphalt between 2 cars, her ruined dress pooling around her like spilled milk. The concrete burned through the fabric, but she couldn't make herself move. Couldn't make herself do anything but sit there while her entire future dissolved into nothing. She heard footsteps running toward her. Multiple people shouting her name. Logan's voice loudest among them, desperate and broken. "Jane! Jane, please, you have to listen to me. I never touched her. I swear to God I never touched her." But the words reached her through a strange fog. The parking lot started spinning. The sun became too bright, too hot, burning through her skull. Someone was screaming, and it took Jane a long moment to realize the sound was coming from her own throat. Then the world went blessedly, mercifully black. She woke to whiteness. White walls, white sheets, white ceiling tiles with small holes that made patterns when she stared at them long enough. A hospital, she realized slowly. The antiseptic smell confirmed it before her brain fully processed what had happened. Jane turned her head and saw an IV drip connected to her arm. Her mouth tasted like cotton and old pennies. Her body felt hollow, scooped out, empty of everything but pain. A nurse noticed her stirring and came over with practiced efficiency. "You're awake. Good, you've been unconscious for 3 days. Severe dehydration and shock. Your body essentially shut down to protect itself. 3 days. Jane stared at the ceiling and tried to process that. 3 days of nothing. 3 days of mercy. There's someone who's been waiting to see you, the nurse continued. He's been sleeping in the lobby since you were admitted. Won't leave even when we tell him visiting hours are over. Won't go home to shower or change clothes. Just sits there like he's keeping vigil." Jane's chest tightened. She knew without asking who it was. "I don't want to see him," she said, and her voice cracked on the words. "I don't want to see Logan ever again." The nurse nodded without judgment. "I'll let him know." But apparently Logan didn't accept the message. Jane heard him before she saw him, his voice raised in the hallway outside her room, arguing with the nurse, with security, with anyone who tried to keep him away. "I just need 5 minutes, please. Just let me explain." "Sir, the patient has requested no visitors. You need to respect that. She's my fiancée. I have a right to see her." Something inside Jane snapped at those words. She sat up despite the dizziness, despite the IV tugging at her arm, and screamed, with everything left in her shattered lungs, "Get out! Get away from me! I never want to see you again!" The door burst open. Logan stood there, looking like he'd been through his own personal hell. His tuxedo was wrinkled and stained. His face was covered in stubble. His eyes were red and swollen like he'd been crying for days. "Good," Jane thought viciously. "Good. Jane, please, just listen. You got my sister pregnant." Jane's voice broke on the words. You slept with Opal while you were planning our wedding. What exactly do you think you can say that will make any of this okay? I didn't. I swear I didn't. I've never touched her, Jane. You have to believe me. Security arrived then, 2 large men who took Logan by the arms despite his protests. He fought them, still trying to reach her, still trying to make her listen to lies she couldn't afford to believe. I love you, he shouted as they dragged him toward the hallway. Jane, I love you! Only you, please. Jane turned her face away and didn't respond. The silence seemed to hurt him more than any words could have. The sound of his broken pleading faded down the corridor until all she could hear was the steady beep of her heart monitor. A knock came later, softer this time. Jane almost told them to go away, but the voice that called through the door was Thea's, "Sweetheart." "It's me. May I come in?" Jane should have said no. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse. But her stepmother had raised her since she was 7 years old, and old habits died hard. Some part of Jane still desperately wanted comfort, even if it came from someone who had never truly loved her. "Fine," she whispered. Thea entered carrying flowers and wearing an expression of such perfect maternal concern that it almost looked real. She sat in the chair beside Jane's bed and took her hand with careful tenderness. "How are you feeling, darling?" "How do you think I'm feeling?" Thea sighed. "I know. I can't imagine what you're going through. But Jane, you need to know something. Opal didn't want to hurt you. She's devastated by all of this. She never meant for any of it to happen." Jane pulled her hand away. "She got pregnant with my fiancé's child." "What part of that was an accident?" "All of it, sweetheart. She told me everything. It was one night months ago, before you and Logan were even engaged. She'd had too much to drink at a company party. He drove her home. One thing led to another. She regretted it immediately, but by then it was too late. The story sounded so reasonable, so possible, so poisonous. She's 12 weeks along," Thea continued softly. "She's been terrified, not knowing what to do. She wanted to get an abortion and never tell anyone, but I convinced her that wouldn't be right. You deserved to know the truth before you married him." "How noble," Jane said bitterly. Thea reached into her purse and pulled out something that made Jane's blood turn to ice. An ultrasound image, grainy and black and white, showing the unmistakable shape of a tiny human being. "She wanted you to see this," Thea said gently. "Proof that she's not lying." Jane stared at the image. 12 weeks. A real baby. Logan's baby with her stepsister. The evidence sat in her lap like a bomb that had already exploded. "Get out," Jane whispered. "Sweetheart, get out!" Thea left the ultrasound on the bedside table. It sat there, mocking Jane long after her stepmother had gone. Proof, evidence, reality. Jane was released 2 days later with nowhere to go. The apartment she had shared with Logan suddenly seemed impossible to face. But when she tried to return anyway, she discovered the locks had been changed. She stood in the hallway with her hospital bag in hand, staring at the door that no longer opened for her. A note had been taped there in Thea's handwriting. "Your belongings have been moved to storage for your safety, dear." The apartment lease was in Logan's name. He agreed it would be best if you didn't stay there during this difficult time. "Call me when you're ready to talk about next steps." "Love, Thea." Jane ripped the note down and crumpled it in her fist. She tried her bank card at the ATM downstairs. Declined. She called the bank. Her accounts had been frozen, pending a mental health evaluation requested by her legal guardian. Legal guardian. She was a grown woman, but her father had left everything in trust with Thea as administrator until certain conditions were met. Conditions that suddenly seemed designed to trap her. Night fell. Jane had nowhere to go and no money to get there. She walked back to the hospital where they had released her just hours before and sat on a bench in the lobby. No one stopped her. No one asked questions. She was just another person in a waiting room, invisible in her pain. She must have fallen asleep sitting up because she woke to someone's hand on her shoulder. Her eyes opened to find Logan kneeling in front of her, his face twisted with anguish. "What are you doing here?" he asked softly. "Why aren't you at home?" "I don't have a home anymore," Jane said. Her voice sounded dead even to her own ears. Thea changed the locks, froze my accounts. I have nothing. Logan's face darkened with fury. That's illegal. She can't. She can, Jane interrupted. My father made her trustee. She has control of everything until I meet the conditions of his will. Then let me help you, Logan pleaded. Let me get you a hotel room, give you money. Anything? No. Jane, you can't sleep on a hospital bench. I'd rather sleep here than accept anything from you. Logan flinched like she'd hit him. I didn't do what she said. Jane, I swear on everything. I never touched Opal. I don't know why she's lying, but she is. She has an ultrasound, Jane said flatly. She's pregnant. Then it's not mine. Get away from me, Jane whispered. You destroyed everything, and now you're sitting here lying to my face like I'm too stupid to see the truth. You're not stupid. You're the smartest person I've ever met, which is why I'm begging you to actually think about this. Use that brilliant mind of yours and ask yourself if any of this makes sense. The only thing that doesn't make sense is why I ever trusted you. Logan stood slowly. His hands were shaking. For a long moment he just looked at her with an expression of such complete devastation that something almost cracked in Jane's chest. Then he pulled out his wallet and placed a credit card on the bench beside her. I'm leaving this here, he said quietly. Use it or don't, but I won't let you sleep on a bench when you're the only good thing that's ever happened to me. He walked away before she could respond. Jane watched him go, then looked down at the credit card sitting beside her like an accusation. She picked it up, walked outside into the night, and threw it at his car as it pulled away from the curb. It bounced off the rear window with a small, satisfying crack. Logan's brake lights flared. He stopped, sat there in the street with his hazards on. Jane turned and walked back inside. She didn't look back. Couldn't look back. That night, she slept on the hospital bench and dreamed of lace turning to ash in her hands. Chapter 2. The Isolation. Jane found her father's cottage by accident, buried in documents she'd never bothered to read before. The lawyer who had handled the estate kept calling, leaving messages about paperwork that needed signing, assets that required attention. She ignored him for 2 weeks until desperation drove her to his office. There's a property in your father's name, the lawyer explained, spreading papers across his desk. A small cottage about 2 hours north. It wasn't included in the trust because your father purchased it just before he died. The deed is yours outright. Ms. Thea has no claim to it. The words hit Jane like oxygen after drowning. Something that belonged to her alone. Something Thea couldn't touch. She drove there that same afternoon, in a car she'd borrowed from a former colleague who asked no questions. The cottage sat at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by trees that had grown wild in the years since her father's death. The porch sagged slightly. The paint had peeled in places, but it was hers. The door stuck when she tried to open it, swollen with humidity and neglect. Jane put her shoulder against it and pushed, until something gave with a crack that echoed through the empty woods. She stumbled inside to dust and cobwebs and the smell of old wood. Her father had left everything exactly as it was. Furniture covered in sheets, books on shelves, a desk by the window overlooking the lake. Jane pulled the sheet off the desk and found it covered in papers, as though he'd been working right up until the moment he died. She sat in his chair and began to read. Letters, mostly. Drafts of letters he'd never sent, all addressed to her. My dearest Jane, I need you to understand something about Thea. She isn't who she pretends to be. I've seen the way she manipulates situations, the way she turns every conversation to her advantage. I don't have proof of anything criminal, but I have this terrible feeling that she's slowly poisoning everything good in our lives. Please be careful around her. Don't trust her with anything important. And whatever you do, protect your inheritance. I've structured it in a trust to keep her from accessing it directly, but she'll find ways. She always finds ways. Jane read the letter 3 times, her hands trembling. Her father had known. Years before he died, he had seen through Thea's perfect maternal facade and tried to warn her. She found more letters, all saying similar things. Observations about Thea's patterns. The way she isolated Jane from friends. The way she created dependencies. The way she used money as control. Her father had documented it all, but never found the courage to confront it directly. "I'm a coward," one letter read. "I should leave her. I should protect you properly. But I'm sick now, and I'm afraid of what she might do if I try to change things. I'm afraid she'll find a way to keep you from me in my final days. So I'm leaving you these letters instead. I hope you never need them. I hope I'm wrong about everything. But if I'm right, then please, Jane, run. Take whatever you can and run as far from her as possible." Jane sat in the growing darkness, surrounded by her father's warnings, and finally understood the trap she'd been living in her entire adult life. Thea hadn't just married her father. She'd staged a careful, patient takeover of everything he owned, everything Jane should have inherited, using love and trust as weapons. And Opal was following the same playbook. The pregnancy wasn't an accident. The wedding interruption wasn't spontaneous. Everything had been planned, staged, designed to destroy Jane completely, while making it look like terrible tragedy rather than calculated malice. But knowing it and proving it were different things. Jane spent that first week alone in the cottage, refusing to answer her phone, refusing to let anyone know where she was. She survived on canned food from the pantry and water from the well. She read her father's letters until she had them memorized. She tried to make sense of how her life had become this nightmare. On the 8th day, she heard a truck coming up the gravel road. Jane looked out the window and felt her stomach drop. Logan's truck, the same one she'd thrown his credit card at weeks ago. He got out slowly, carrying what looked like groceries. He didn't approach the house. Instead, he walked to the porch, set the bags down carefully, and went back to his truck for tools. Jane watched from behind the curtains as he spent the next 3 hours fixing the sagging porch steps. He worked methodically, precisely, never once looking at the windows where she was hiding. When he finished, he loaded his tools back into the truck, got in, and drove away without knocking. The groceries sat on the porch like a question she didn't know how to answer. He came back the next day, and the next, and the next, each time bringing something different: groceries, firewood, repair supplies. He fixed the roof leak. He replaced the broken window in the kitchen. He cleared the overgrown path to the lake. He never knocked, never tried to force a conversation, just did the work and left. 3 weeks passed like this. Jane watched him from her hiding places inside, her emotions tangled into knots she couldn't undo. Part of her wanted to run outside and demand explanations. Part of her wanted to scream at him to leave her alone. Part of her just wanted him to hold her while she fell apart. On day 22, she opened the door while he was replacing rotted boards on the steps. He looked up, startled, his hammer frozen mid-swing. "Why do you keep coming here?" Jane asked. Her voice sounded rough from disuse. Logan set the hammer down carefully. "Because I need you to know I didn't do what she said. She has an ultrasound." "I've never touched Opal," he said again, his voice steady. "Not once, not ever. I don't know whose baby that is, but it isn't mine. Men always say that." "Then come to her next doctor's appointment with me," Logan said. "I'll demand a paternity test right there in front of everyone. Let's see if she agrees to it." Jane's breath caught. "She won't let you near her doctors. Pregnancy is delicate. Stress is dangerous." "Or she's lying," Logan countered. "And she won't risk exposure." "That's a convenient excuse for why we can't prove anything. So is claiming pregnancy." Stress whenever someone asks for proof. They stared at each other across the broken porch. Jane could see the dark circles under his eyes, the weight he'd lost, the exhaustion written into every line of his face. He looked like he'd been through his own private war. Good, that vicious part of her thought again. He should suffer too. But another part of her, the part that had loved him enough to almost marry him, whispered that maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe Opal really was lying. Maybe everything really was as impossible as it seemed. "Leave," Jane said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Don't come back." Logan picked up his hammer and went back to work on the steps. No? Excuse me? I said no. He drove a nail with 3 precise strikes. I'm not leaving. I'm not giving up. I'm not letting you face this alone. You don't get to make that choice. And you don't get to push away everyone who cares about you just because you're scared. The words hit like a slap. Jane stepped back, her hand on the doorframe for support. I'm not scared. I'm protecting myself. You're hiding, Logan said, not looking up from his work. There's a difference. Jane wanted to argue, wanted to scream, wanted to throw something at his stubborn head. Instead, she went back inside and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. That night, she looked out to see his truck parked at the edge of her property. He was sleeping in it, she realized. Actually sleeping in his truck rather than leaving her alone out here. She should have been angry. Should have called the police and reported him for trespassing or stalking or something that would make him go away. Instead, she lay awake in her father's bed, staring at the ceiling, and wondered what it meant that he kept coming back. What it meant that he wouldn't give up. What it meant that some part of her didn't want him to. He stayed in his truck for 7 straight nights, like a sentinel keeping watch. On the 8th morning, Jane opened the door to find him asleep in the driver's seat, his neck bent at an angle that had to be excruciating. She stood there watching him for a long moment. In sleep, he looked younger, vulnerable, nothing like the cheating bastard she'd convinced herself he was. Jane walked back inside before he could wake and see her watching, but she left the door unlocked, just in case. Chapter 3. The Custody Destruction. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, official and threatening in its stark white perfection. Jane stood in the cottage doorway, her hands shaking as she read the return address. Law offices she'd never heard of, representing a client she knew too well. Opal was suing for full custody of Gracelyn. The words blurred together on the page. Emergency hearing, 5 days. Allegations of violent behavior. Concern for the child's safety. Witness testimony regarding mental instability. Jane's legs gave out. She sat hard on the porch steps Logan had repaired, the legal papers scattering around her like fallen leaves. This couldn't be happening. Opal had barely acknowledged Gracelyn's existence for years, treating the child like an inconvenient accessory to her carefully curated life. But now she wanted custody. Now, when she needed another weapon to destroy Jane completely, Logan's truck appeared at the end of the driveway right on schedule. He'd been coming every morning for weeks now, their silent routine as predictable as sunrise. But today, Jane didn't retreat inside. She stayed frozen on the steps, the summons crumpled in her fist. He was out of the truck before the engine stopped, running to her with alarm written across his face. What happened? Jane, what is it? She handed him the papers without speaking, watched his face darken as he read, his jaw clenching tighter with every line. This is insane, he said finally. She can't take Gracelyn from you. You've raised that child since she was born. She can do whatever she wants, Jane whispered. She has money, lawyers, Thea backing her up. What do I have? Me, Logan said immediately. You have me. My legal team, my resources, everything. Jane looked up at him, this man who kept showing up despite everything. I can't accept your help. Why not? Because then I'll owe you. I'll be dependent on you, and I can't survive that again. Logan knelt in front of her, his eyes fierce. You don't owe me anything. Not now, not ever. But that little girl deserves better than this, and you know it. I'll use a public defender. Jane, no. She stood abruptly, moving away from his proximity. I won't let you save me. I have to do this myself. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Jane spent 5 days trying to prepare, reading legal websites until her eyes burned, practicing what she'd say to the judge. She borrowed a suit from a thrift store and ironed it carefully. She organized every document proving her care for Gracelyn over the years. It wouldn't be enough. She knew it wouldn't be enough, but she had to try. The courthouse loomed like a cathedral of judgment. Jane arrived alone, clutching her folder of documents, feeling impossibly small in the marble lobby. Her public defender met her outside the courtroom, a tired woman named Sarah who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. I reviewed the file, Sarah said without preamble. I'll be honest with you, this isn't going to go well. The other side has serious resources. Can we win? Jane asked. Anything's possible. It wasn't reassuring. They entered the courtroom together. Opal sat at the opposite table, flanked by 3 lawyers in expensive suits. Thea sat behind them, dressed in mourning black like she was attending a funeral. When she saw Jane, she smiled. Small, private, victorious. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The proceedings began with clinical efficiency that made Jane feel like a specimen being dissected rather than a human fighting for her family. Opal's lead attorney was a man named Rutherford, silver-haired and smooth-voiced. He stood and began his opening statement with the confidence of someone who'd already won. Your Honor, this case is about protecting a vulnerable child from an unstable guardian. Ms. Jane Thompson attacked my client at what should have been a joyous occasion. She displayed violent, erratic behavior in front of hundreds of witnesses. Since then, she has isolated herself, refusing mental health treatment, living in conditions unsuitable for a child. Jane's public defender objected weakly. The judge overruled. Rutherford continued, painting Jane as a dangerous, unhinged woman spiraling into madness. When he finished, Opal took the stand. She wore a maternity dress, her fake pregnancy on full display. Her hand rested on her stomach as she was sworn in, the gesture protective and theatrical. Jane wanted to be sick. Can you describe what happened at the wedding? Rutherford asked gently. Opal's voice trembled perfectly. I had to tell Jane the truth about my pregnancy. I knew it would hurt her, but she deserved to know before she married him. I thought she'd be upset, but I never imagined she'd attack me like that. Can you describe the attack? She lunged at me, screaming. Her hands went for my throat. I fell backward, trying to get away. She followed me down, tearing at my dress, my hair. I thought she was going to kill me. I thought she was going to kill my baby. Lies. Every word was a lie. But Rutherford played a video on the courtroom screen. Your footage from someone's phone showing Jane lunging forward, grabbing Opal, both women going down in a tangle of fabric and fury. Without audio, without context, it looked exactly like Opal described. A violent assault on a pregnant woman. Jane's defender stood to cross-examine. Ms. Opal, had you been intimate with Logan before that day? Yes, Opal said, her voice small and ashamed. I'm not proud of it. And you're certain he's the father of your child? Absolutely certain. Have you taken a paternity test to confirm this? I don't need to, Opal said, her hand moving protectively over her stomach again. I know my own body, Sarah pressed harder, but you'd be willing to take a test if requested. My doctor advised against any unnecessary stress during pregnancy. The test involves needles and risks. I won't endanger my baby to satisfy her paranoia. Perfect answer. Reasonable, maternal, impossible to argue against. Then Thea took the stand. She wore tragedy like a well-fitted gown, her face drawn with concern that looked genuine enough to fool anyone who didn't know her. Rutherford handled her gently, like she was made of glass. Mrs. Thea, you've known Jane since she was a child. Can you speak to her mental state? Thea sighed heavily. Jane has always struggled, even as a young girl. She had episodes of rage, depression, instability. Her father and I did everything we could. Therapy, medication, support. But she refused treatment as she got older. Jane's hands clenched in her lap. More lies. Did you ever seek psychiatric help for her? Multiple times, Thea said. She produced documents from her purse, spreading them before the judge. These are records from her college years. 2 hospitalizations for violent episodes, psychiatric holds, medication prescriptions she refused to take. Jane stared at the papers in horror. They looked official, complete with hospital logos and doctor signatures. But she'd never been hospitalized, never had violent episodes. These documents were elaborate forgeries. Objection. Sarah stood finally. I've never seen these records. They weren't disclosed during discovery. They're medical records, Rutherford said smoothly. We only obtained them this morning from the hospitals. Patient privacy laws prevented earlier disclosure. The judge examined the documents, frowning. I'll allow them, Jane felt the ground disappearing beneath her. They'd created an entire false psychiatric history for her, and the judge was accepting it as truth. Sarah tried to fight back during cross-examination. "Mrs. Thea, why are you only producing these records now? Why weren't they mentioned during any previous proceedings?" "I wanted to protect Jane's privacy," Thea said. "I hoped we could resolve this without exposing her troubled past. But I can't put my desire for discretion above Gracelyn's safety." She sounded so reasonable, so concerned, so completely convincing. When it was Jane's turn to testify, she felt like she was drowning. Every answer she gave sounded defensive, desperate. She tried to explain about the forged records, the manipulation, the lies, but without proof. Her accusations made her sound exactly like what they claimed she was, paranoid and unstable. "Ms. Thompson," Rutherford said during cross-examination, "do you deny attacking my client at the wedding?" "I was upset, yes, but she was lying. Please answer the question. Did you physically assault Ms. Opal or not?" "I grabbed her, but..." "Yes or no?" "Yes, but you don't understand the context." "Thank you. That's all I need." He showed the video again. Played character witnesses testifying they'd seen Jane's erratic behavior. Produced statements from former friends claiming she was possessive, jealous, controlling. Jane sat at the defense table, watching her life be systematically destroyed by carefully constructed lies. Sarah tried objecting, tried defending, but every attempt fell flat. The judge deliberated for barely an hour. When he returned, his face was grave. "I've reviewed all testimony and evidence presented today. This is not an easy decision, but the safety of the child must be paramount. Ms. Opal has demonstrated stability, resources, and genuine concern for the child's welfare. Ms. Thompson has displayed violent behavior and appears to be experiencing significant mental health challenges." Jane couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. "Therefore, I award full custody of Gracelyn Thompson to Ms. Opal Thompson, effective immediately. Ms. Jane Thompson will be granted supervised visitation only. 2 visits per month, 2 hours each, with an appointed supervisor present at all times." The gavel came down like an execution. Jane heard herself screaming. "No, she's lying. All of it is lies. You can't do this." Bailiffs moved toward her. Sarah grabbed her arm, trying to calm her. But Jane couldn't stop screaming, couldn't stop fighting as they pulled her from her chair. "She's my daughter. Gracelyn is mine. Don't do this, please." Across the courtroom, Gracelyn sat beside Opal, tears streaming down her small face. Jane, don't go!" The child's voice broke something fundamental inside Jane. She lunged toward her, needing to hold her one more time, needing to explain. The bailiffs caught her, restraining her arms as she thrashed. "Let me say goodbye. Please, just let me say goodbye." They dragged her backward toward the doors. Gracelyn was sobbing openly now, reaching for her. Opal held the child back with false gentleness, whispering things Jane couldn't hear. The courtroom doors swung shut. Jane collapsed in the hallway, her screams echoing off the marble walls until they became wordless sounds of pure anguish. When she finally fell silent, she looked up to find Logan sitting against the wall opposite her. He'd been there the entire time, she realized, watching from the back row, witnessing her complete destruction. "I told you not to come," she whispered. "I know." They sat in the empty courthouse hallway as afternoon light faded through the high windows. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't sound like more breaking. Finally, as darkness fell, Logan stood and offered his hand. "Let me help you appeal this." Jane looked at his outstretched hand for a long time. Pride said refuse. Survival said accept. Why? She asked. "Why do you keep offering to help me when all I've done is push you away?" Logan's expression was raw with emotion. "Because watching you suffer for something I didn't do is killing me. Because that little girl doesn't deserve this. Because even if you never forgive me, even if you hate me forever, I can't walk away while you're fighting alone." "I do hate you," Jane said. "I know. But I need help. I know that too." She took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. Her body felt like lead. "We appeal," she said. "For Gracelyn, not for us." Understood. They walked out of the courthouse together, not touching, barely connected. But it was the first time since the wedding that Jane hadn't sent him away. It felt like surrender and salvation all at once. Chapter 4. The First Visit. 2 weeks felt like 2 years. Jane marked each day on the cottage calendar with an X, counting down to her first supervised visit with Gracelyn. The rules had arrived by certified mail, typed in cold legal language that reduced her relationship with her daughter to bureaucratic restrictions. No gifts, no food, no promises about the future, no discussion of the custody arrangement, no physical contact unless approved by the supervisor. 2 hours exactly, not a minute more. She'd raised this child from birth, and now she needed permission to hold her. Logan came to the cottage every day during those 2 weeks, his arms full of legal documents and appeal strategies. They worked at her father's desk in tense silence, professional and distant. Jane accepted his help because she had no choice, but she kept a careful wall between them. On the morning of the visit, she woke before dawn, too anxious to sleep. She chose her clothes carefully, rejecting anything too casual or too formal. She needed to look stable, maternal, safe. She settled on a simple dress that Gracelyn had always liked. Logan appeared at his usual time, but today he held car keys instead of paperwork. "I'm driving you. I can drive myself. The visitation center is an hour away. You haven't been sleeping. You're shaking right now." His voice was gentle but firm. "Let me drive you," Jane wanted to argue, but he was right. Her hands were trembling so badly she'd already dropped her coffee mug twice. Fine. The drive felt endless. Neither of them spoke. Jane watched the landscape blur past, her stomach churning with anxiety. What if Gracelyn hated her now? What if Opal had poisoned her completely? What if the child she'd raised no longer recognized her as family? The visitation center was a squat brick building designed to look cheerful and failing miserably. Bright murals covered the walls, but they couldn't hide the institutional sadness underneath. This was where broken families came to see their children under watchful eyes. Logan parked but didn't turn off the engine. "I'll wait here." "You don't have to." "I'll wait," he repeated. "The whole 2 hours. I'll be right here when you come out." Something in Jane's chest loosened slightly. She nodded and got out of the car before she could say something she'd regret. "Like thank you, like I'm scared, like I need you." Inside, a woman named Mrs. Chen introduced herself as the assigned supervisor. She led Jane to a small room, painted aggressively yellow, furnished with child-sized chairs and a table covered in worn toys. One wall was entirely glass, allowing observation from the hallway. "The child will be brought in shortly," Mrs. Chen said. "Remember the rules. No discussion of the custody case. No negative talk about the mother. Keep everything positive and age-appropriate." Jane sat in one of the tiny chairs, her knees nearly to her chest, and waited. Every second felt like an hour. Finally, the door opened. Opal entered first, holding Gracelyn's hand. The child looked smaller than Jane remembered, dressed in a frilly pink dress she'd never worn before. Her hair was styled elaborately, with ribbons and clips that Gracelyn hated. Jane's heart seized. "Sweetheart." Gracelyn didn't look up. She stared at the floor, her free hand twisted in Opal's skirt. Opal knelt beside the child with theatrical gentleness. "Remember what we talked about, honey. You're safe here. The nice lady will watch to make sure nothing bad happens." Jane's jaw clenched, making it sound like Gracelyn needed protection from her own mother. Opal kissed Gracelyn's forehead and left. The child stood frozen in the middle of the room, still not looking at Jane. "Gracelyn, baby, I've missed you so much." Jane kept her voice steady despite the tears threatening. "Come sit with me." The child didn't move. Jane tried again, softer. "Do you want to color? I see crayons over there. We could draw together like we used to." Nothing. Gracelyn might as well have been a statue. 20 minutes passed this way. Jane talking softly, trying every approach she could think of. Gracelyn remaining silent and distant, as though separated by more than just a few feet of yellow floor. Finally, Jane couldn't take it anymore. "Graceland, sweetheart, please. Please talk to me. I love you. Nothing has changed." The child's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Mama said you don't want me anymore." Jane's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. "What, baby? No. That's not true. That's not true at all. She said you're going to have a new baby with him. She said you'll forget about me." The room tilted. Jane grabbed the edge of the table for support. "I'm not having a baby. Graceland, look at me. Please look at me." The child finally raised her eyes, and Jane saw fear there. Fear of her, of someone who had been her entire world. "I don't have a new baby," Jane said carefully. "And even if I did, I could never forget you. You're my heart. You're everything. Do you understand?" Graceland's lower lip trembled. "Mama said you hurt her, that you tried to hurt her baby." "That's not what happened." Jane stopped herself. She couldn't violate the rules, couldn't say negative things about Opal, couldn't defend herself without breaking the conditions of her visitation. "I would never hurt anyone, especially not someone you love." "But Mama said—" "I know what she said." Jane's voice cracked. "But I need you to remember who I am. Remember all the nights I stayed with you when you were sick. Remember how I taught you to read. Remember the songs we sang together. Does that sound like someone who would hurt people?" Graceland's face crumpled. "I don't know anymore. Mama says lots of things, and Grandma Thea says lots of things, and they're different from what you say, and I don't know what's real." The child started crying in earnest, her small body shaking with confusion and fear. Jane moved instinctively to comfort her, but Mrs. Chen stepped forward. "Physical contact needs to be approved," she said. Not unkindly, but firmly. "She's crying! She's my daughter and she's crying!" "I understand, but those are the rules." Jane wanted to scream. Instead, she knelt on the floor at Graceland's level, not touching, just close. "It's okay to be confused. It's okay to not know what to believe. But can you believe this one thing? I love you. I will always love you. And I will never, ever stop fighting to be with you." Graceland hiccuped through her tears. "Promise?" "I promise. Cross your heart." Jane made the gesture they'd shared 1,000 times before, drawing an X over her chest. "Cross my heart and hope to die." Graceland made the same gesture, her small hand shaking. It was the first real connection they'd had since entering this terrible room. Mrs. Chen checked her watch. "I'm afraid we need to end the visit. The child is becoming too distressed." "No!" Jane stood abruptly. "We still have 40 minutes. The child's welfare comes first. This visit is over. Please, just a few more minutes. She's finally talking to me." The door opened. Opal appeared with perfect timing, as though she'd been watching from the hallway. She hurried to Graceland, gathering the crying child into her arms. "Oh, sweetheart, it's okay. Mama's here. You're safe now." Jane watched, helpless, as Opal carried Graceland toward the door. The child looked back over her mother's shoulder, her face blotchy with tears. "Jane," she called. "I'm here, baby. Will you come back?" "Yes, 2 weeks. I'll be here. Promise?" "Promise." Then they were gone. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a prison cell locking. Jane stood alone in the aggressively yellow room, staring at the space where her daughter had been. Mrs. Chen touched her arm gently. "You can go now." Jane walked out in a daze, found her way to the parking lot. Saw Logan's truck still there, waiting as promised. He got out when he saw her, his face lined with concern. Jane made it 3 steps toward him before her legs gave out. She collapsed on the asphalt, unable to hold herself up anymore. Logan was there instantly, catching her before she hit the ground completely. "I've got you. They're taking her from me," Jane sobbed into his shoulder. "They're making her afraid of me. They're destroying everything we were." "I know. She thinks I don't want her. She thinks I'm going to forget her. We'll fix it." "How? How do you fix this?" Logan didn't answer. He just held her while she broke apart in a parking lot, surrounded by other broken families coming and going with their supervised visits. When Jane finally had no tears left, she pulled back and looked at him. Really looked at him. He had tears on his own face, she realized, crying silently while she sobbed. "Why are you crying?" she asked. "Because you're in pain. Because I can't fix it. Because this is all so monumentally unfair. He wiped his eyes roughly. Because I'd give anything to take this away from you. Jane stared at him. At this man who kept showing up, kept helping, kept caring despite everything. I've been so awful to you. You've been protecting yourself. What if you're telling the truth? The words came out small and broken. What if you never touched her? What if I've been hating you for something you didn't do? Logan cupped her face gently. Then we'll prove it together. But Jane, even if you never believe me, even if you hate me until the day I die, I'm not walking away from this fight. That little girl deserves better. And so do you. Jane leaned into his touch, too exhausted to maintain her walls anymore. Take me home. Okay. They drove back to the cottage in silence, but this time Jane's hand rested on the seat between them. Not quite touching his, but close enough to feel the warmth. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't trust. But it was the first crack in the armor she'd built around her heart. And right now, that was more than she'd thought possible. Chapter 5. The Sickness. Jane woke to her stomach heaving, barely making it to the bathroom before she was sick. It had been 5 days of this, each morning worse than the last. She told herself it was stress, grief, the weight of everything crushing her from the inside out. But her body knew better. Logan found her on the bathroom floor that afternoon, too weak to get up, too dizzy to stand. She'd passed out at some point, lost time she couldn't account for. His face swam into view above her, pale with fear. How long have you been like this? His voice seemed to come from very far away. Few days. It's just stress. Jane, you're burning up. I'm taking you to the hospital. No. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. The room spun violently. I don't need a hospital. You're dehydrated and feverish, and you just passed out. Yes, you do. He picked her up despite her weak protests, carrying her to his truck like she weighed nothing. Jane was too exhausted to fight. She leaned against the window and let darkness take her again. The hospital was a blur of bright lights and concerned faces. They hooked her up to IVs, took blood, asked questions she couldn't quite focus on. Logan stayed beside her the entire time, holding her hand, answering questions when she couldn't. The doctor was a kind woman with grey hair and gentle eyes. She came back after what felt like hours, carrying results that made her smile softly. Well, Ms. Thompson, I have an explanation for your symptoms. Jane braced herself for bad news, cancer, organ failure, something that would make this nightmare complete. You're pregnant. About 11 weeks along. The world stopped. Jane stared at the doctor, unable to process the words. Pregnant. 11 weeks. That meant the night before the wedding, she whispered. The doctor nodded. Based on your dates, yes, congratulations. Logan's hand tightened around hers. Jane looked at him, saw joy flash across his face before concern replaced it. He knew what she was thinking, knew what this meant all this time. All these months of believing he'd gotten Opal pregnant, she'd been carrying his child herself. The doctor left them alone. Silence filled the room like water, rising until Jane thought she might drown in it. Finally, she found her voice. This happened the night before our wedding. I know. I've been pregnant this whole time. While she was lying about being pregnant with your baby, I was actually carrying your baby. Yes. How did we not know? Jane's voice rose. How did I not know? You were in shock. Your body shut down. You stopped eating, stopped taking care of yourself. Logan's voice was thick with emotion. You were surviving, not living. Jane looked down at her stomach. 11 weeks. Almost 3 months. A baby growing inside her while her world fell apart. Logan's baby. Proof that they'd loved each other once. That they'd been real before everything turned to lies. I can't do this, she said suddenly. I can't raise a baby like this. You're not alone. Yes, I am. The words came out harsh. You're a lie. This is a lie. Everything is lies. Logan moved from the chair to kneel beside her hospital bed. Jane, look at me. Look at me. She did, against her better judgment. I have never touched your sister. I have never wanted your sister. There is only you. There has only ever been you." His voice shook with intensity. "I don't know how to make you believe me, but I will spend every day for the rest of my life trying." "Then prove it," Jane said. Tears were running down her face now. "Prove she's lying. How?" "Get her to take a paternity test. If you've never touched her, there's no baby to test. Or there is a baby and it's not yours. She'll refuse. Then we'll know the truth, won't we? If she refuses, she's lying. If she agrees, we'll have proof one way or another." Logan stood slowly. "You want me to force her to take a paternity test? I want you to prove you're telling the truth," Jane said. "I need you to prove it, because right now I'm carrying your child, and I don't even know if I can trust you. Do you understand how that feels?" His face showed that he did, that it was destroying him the same way it was destroying her. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll make her take the test. You promise?" "I promise." He kissed her forehead gently. "Rest now. You need to take care of yourself. You're not just fighting for Gracelyn anymore." Jane's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. "A baby, new life in the middle of all this death and destruction." It felt impossible, cruel, like the universe was playing the worst joke imaginable, but it was also real, the most real thing in her life right now. Logan left after the doctors insisted she stay overnight for observation. Jane lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything. She was pregnant with Logan's child. Opal claimed to be pregnant with Logan's child. One of them was lying. Everything hinged on proving which one. And if Logan could prove Opal was lying, that meant Jane had spent months hating an innocent man, had pushed him away while carrying his baby, had believed the worst of someone who loved her. But if he couldn't prove it, that meant he'd betrayed her and was now manipulating her vulnerability. Either way, someone's life was built on lies. Jane fell asleep with her hand on her stomach, protecting this tiny life that had somehow survived her darkest moments. This baby that proved love had existed once, even if she couldn't remember what that felt like anymore. When she woke, Logan was back. He sat in the chair by her bed, watching her with an expression that made her chest ache. "I thought you left," she said. "I did. Came back." He held up a bag. "Brought you real food. Hospital food is terrible." "You didn't have to. I wanted to." They ate in comfortable silence, something they hadn't shared since before the wedding. Jane found herself studying him, looking for signs of deception, of guilt, of anything that would tell her what was true. But all she saw was a man who looked exhausted and heartbroken and determined. "I'm going to Opal tomorrow," Logan said finally. "I'm going to demand the paternity test. What if she refuses? Then I'll sue for custody of her baby and force it through the courts." Jane's eyebrows rose. "You'd do that? To prove I'm innocent? To get you to believe me? Yes, I'd do anything. Even take custody of a baby that isn't yours." "It's a bluff," Logan admitted. "But she doesn't know that. If she calls it, we'll know she's telling the truth. If she backs down, we'll know she's lying." It was risky, dangerous, could backfire spectacularly. But it was also the first proactive plan anyone had offered. The first real attempt to fight back instead of just surviving. "Okay," Jane said. "Do it." Logan stood to leave, but Jane caught his hand. He looked back at her, surprised. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not giving up, for fighting when I couldn't." "You've been fighting this whole time," Logan said. "You just didn't have anyone fighting beside you." After he left, Jane lay awake thinking about everything that had been said and unsaid. About the baby growing inside her. About Gracelyn living with Opal. About Logan's face when the doctor said she was pregnant. He'd looked happy. For just a moment, before concern and worry took over, he'd looked purely, genuinely happy. Guilty men didn't look like that. Did they? Jane didn't know anymore. Didn't trust her own judgment. But for the first time in months, she felt something besides despair. She felt the tiniest flicker of hope, and terrifying as it was, she held onto it like a lifeline in the dark. Chapter 6: The Confrontation. Logan went to Opal's penthouse the next morning, armed with legal documents and cold fury. The building was one of those glass towers that screamed wealth, the kind of place Jane should have been able to afford with her inheritance. Instead, Thea and Opal lived here while Jane scraped by in a cottage with broken windows. The doorman tried to stop him. Logan showed identification that made the man's eyes widen. Apparently, money talked even here. He was waved through to the elevator with nervous apologies. Opal answered the door, wearing silk loungewear, her fake pregnancy belly prominent under the expensive fabric. Her face went pale when she saw him. "Logan, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk." He pushed past her into the apartment without waiting for invitation. Now. The penthouse was obscene in its luxury. Marble floors, designer furniture, art that probably cost more than most people made in a year. All bought with money stolen from Jane. "You can't just barge in here," Opal said, but her voice shook. "I could call security." "Go ahead. We'll have this conversation in front of them." Logan turned to face her. "I want a paternity test." Opal's hand flew to her stomach. "What?" "You heard me. Paternity test today. That's invasive. My doctor said stress is dangerous for the baby. Then it should be simple to prove I'm the father." Logan pulled papers from his jacket. "I'm filing for custody. Full custody of the child you claim is mine. If it's my baby, I have every legal right." Opal's eyes widened with panic. "You can't do that. Watch me. Take the test or I'll see you in court and force it." She backed away from him, her performance of fear almost convincing. "You're being cruel. I'm carrying your child and you're threatening me. If it's my child, prove it. I don't have to prove anything." Her voice rose. "I know what happened between us." "Really?" Logan's voice was ice. "Tell me when." "Tell me where. Give me one specific detail about this supposed affair." Opal opened her mouth, closed it. Her eyes darted around like she was searching for a script. "It was at the company party. You drove me home. I've never been to any party where you were present. I've never driven you anywhere. I've never been alone with you once." He stepped closer. "You're lying, and we both know it." "You're calling me a liar?" "Yes, that's exactly what I'm calling you." The penthouse door opened. Thea swept in, carrying shopping bags, stopping short when she saw Logan. Her expression cycled through surprise, calculation, and finally cold fury. "What are you doing in our home?" "Demanding the truth," Logan said without taking his eyes off Opal. "Your daughter claims she's pregnant with my child. I want a paternity test to prove it." Thea set down her bags with careful precision. "My daughter doesn't need to prove anything to you. If she's carrying my child, she absolutely does. The test is dangerous. It requires needles through the abdomen. No responsible doctor would recommend it without cause. Then I'll sue for custody and force it through the courts." Logan dropped the legal papers on their marble counter. "Read them." "I'm filing tomorrow unless she agrees to testing today." Thea picked up the papers, her face hardening as she read. When she looked up, there was something new in her eyes. Recognition. "You lied about who you were," she said slowly. "The background check we ran showed middle management. But these papers, this law firm, this kind of money," her voice trailed off. "You're not who you pretended to be. Neither is your daughter," Logan shot back. "The difference is, I'm not claiming false paternity to destroy someone's life." Thea moved to stand beside Opal, united front against him. "Get out of our home. Not until she agrees to the test. You have no right to demand anything from us." Logan pulled out his phone, tapping the screen a few times before showing it to Thea. "This is forensic accounting of Jane's inheritance. Every dollar you've stolen, every illegal transfer, every forged document. I have enough evidence to put you in prison for 20 years. Thea's face remained frozen, but her hands clenched. "You're bluffing. Try me." "Refuse the paternity test, and I'll file criminal charges along with the custody suit. Let's see how much the judge appreciates fraud, embezzlement, and perjury." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Thea laughed, cold and sharp. "You think you're protecting her? But Jane is weak, just like her pathetic father. She'll never survive what's coming." "What's coming is you going to prison," Logan said. "So make your choice. Paternity test today, or I file everything tomorrow. He left the papers on their counter and walked out before they could respond. His hands were shaking with rage, but he'd said what needed saying. Now they'd have to decide whether to call his bluff or fold. Logan drove back to the cottage to tell Jane what happened. But when he turned onto her road, he saw immediately that something was wrong. Her front door hung open. Glass glittered on the porch. He was out of the truck and running before he'd fully processed what he was seeing. The cottage had been destroyed. Windows smashed. Furniture overturned and broken. Spray paint covered the walls in violent red letters. Baby killer, monster, you don't deserve children. Logan's blood turned to ice. His security team was already there, he realized. Men in dark suits examining the damage, taking photos, dusting for prints. He'd hired them weeks ago without telling Jane, knowing Thea and Opal would eventually escalate. When did this happen? He demanded. Sometime in the last 3 hours, the head of security replied. We have footage of a vehicle leaving the property, but the plates were obscured. Jane's car pulled up behind his truck. Logan turned to see her getting out, her face confused. Then she saw the cottage. No! The word came out broken. She started walking faster, then running toward her destroyed home. No, no, no. Logan caught her before she could go inside. Don't. There's glass everywhere. Let security clear it first. They destroyed it! Jane stared at the spray-painted walls, tears streaming down her face. They destroyed everything. I'm so sorry. I should have anticipated this. She turned on him suddenly, eyes blazing. You knew this would happen. You knew confronting them would make them do this? I thought they might retaliate. That's why I hired security to watch the property. You hired security? Without telling me. Her voice rose. You made decisions about my life without asking me? I was trying to protect you. I don't need you to protect me. Jane shoved him hard. I need you to treat me like an adult who can make her own choices. Jane, please, what else have you done without telling me? What else have you decided I'm too fragile to handle? She was shouting now, months of frustration pouring out. You keep trying to save me, but I don't need saving. I need someone who trusts me to save myself. I do trust you. No, you don't. You make decisions for me. Hire people without asking. Show up every day, even when I tell you not to. Her hands were shaking. You don't see me as capable. You see me as broken. Logan's face fell. That's not true. Then why didn't you tell me about the security team? Why didn't you ask before confronting Opal? Why do you keep doing things behind my back? Because I'm terrified. The words burst out of him. I'm terrified that something will happen to you, and I won't be there. I'm terrified that Thea will hurt you worse than she already has. I'm terrified every single second that I'll lose you completely. You can't lose what you don't have, Jane said quietly. I'm not yours, Logan. I haven't been yours since the wedding. The words hit him like physical blows. He stepped back, hands raised in surrender. You're right. I overstepped. I should have asked first. Yes, you should have. I'll call off the security. Don't! Jane sighed, exhaustion replacing anger. They're here now. But Logan, you can't keep making choices for me. Even good choices. Even protective choices. My whole life people have controlled me. My father, Thea, the courts. I won't let you do it too. I understand. Do you? Because this is a pattern. You fixing my porch, bringing groceries, hiring lawyers, hiring security. All good things, but none of them asked for. I need to handle my own life, even if I handle it badly. Logan nodded slowly. You're carrying my child. That makes it hard to stand back and watch you struggle. I know. But you have to try. Jane looked at the destroyed cottage behind her. I can't fight Thea and fight you at the same time. I'm not your enemy. Then stop acting like my savior. Just be someone who stands beside me, not in front of me. The distinction was small but crucial. Logan heard it, understood it, felt the truth of it settle in his chest. Okay, I'll try. That's all I'm asking. She turned back to the cottage, surveying the damage with something like resignation. I can't stay here tonight. There's a hotel in town. Let me at least drive you there. Jane almost refused. He saw it in her face, the instinct to reject help on principle. But then she nodded. Okay, but I'm paying for my own room. Understood. They spent the next hour salvaging what they could from the cottage. Jane's father's letters were safe in a waterproof box. Her clothes were mostly intact, but the furniture was beyond repair, and the walls would need professional cleaning. As they worked, Logan's phone rang. He answered, listened, then looked at Jane with an unreadable expression. That was my lawyer. Opal's attorney called. She's agreed to the paternity test. Jane's hands stilled on the box she was packing. She agreed? Apparently, 30 minutes after I left, she called, saying she'd do it. The test is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Why would she agree? Jane asked slowly. If she's lying, why would she agree? Maybe she's not lying, Logan said quietly. Maybe I'm wrong about everything, but something in his voice said he didn't believe that. Neither did Jane. If Opal was lying about the pregnancy, agreeing to the test made no sense. Unless she had another plan. Another trap they couldn't see yet. Jane looked at Logan across her destroyed home. This man she still couldn't fully trust, who kept trying to save her despite her pushing him away. What happens if the test proves you're the father? Then I'll figure out how to co-parent with someone I've never touched, because that's the only explanation I have. He met her eyes. But Jane, I'm telling you the truth. I've never been with your sister. We'll know tomorrow, Jane said. One way or another, we'll know the truth. That night, in separate hotel rooms down the hall from each other, neither of them slept. Jane lay awake with one hand on her stomach, feeling the early flutter of life inside her. Logan sat by his window, staring at nothing, preparing for whatever came next. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow would prove someone was lying. Tomorrow would change everything again. Chapter 7. The Revelation. The paternity test was scheduled for 9 in the morning at a private medical facility. Logan arrived early, pacing the parking lot, while his lawyers finalized paperwork inside. Jane had refused to come, saying she couldn't watch whatever happened next. But at 8:45, Opal's attorney called. The test was cancelled. Opal had been taken to the emergency room overnight with complications. High blood pressure, risk of miscarriage, doctor's orders for complete bed rest. No unnecessary procedures until the pregnancy stabilized. Logan stood in the parking lot holding his phone, reading the email his lawyer forwarded. Medical documentation attached, all official-looking, all perfectly timed to avoid the test. It's fake, he said to his lawyer. All of it is fake. We can't prove that without access to her medical records. Then get access. It's not that simple. Privacy laws, find a way. Logan ended the call and drove straight to Jane's hotel. He needed to tell her before Opal's version of events reached her first. But when he knocked on Jane's door, there was no answer. He tried calling. It went to voicemail. Panic started creeping up his spine. He convinced the front desk to do a wellness check. The room was empty. Jane's belongings were there, but she was gone. Logan was about to call the police when his phone rang. Jane's number. Where are you? He demanded. I've been looking everywhere. I'm at the cottage. Her voice sounded strange, tight. You need to come here now. What's wrong? Just come, please. He broke every speed limit getting there. Jane's car was parked in the driveway, next to a vehicle he didn't recognize. The cottage door stood open, light spilling into the early morning darkness. Logan ran inside to find Jane sitting on the floor with Gracelyn. The child was curled in Jane's lap, crying softly. Jane's face was wet with tears, but her expression was something between rage and vindication. What happened? Logan asked. How is Gracelyn here? She ran away, Jane said quietly. Walked 6 miles in the middle of the night. She has something to show us. Gracelyn lifted her head from Jane's shoulder. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face blotchy with tears. In her small hand she clutched a phone. I've been recording them, the child whispered. For a really long time. Since before the wedding. Logan's heart stopped. Recording who? Mama Opal and Grandma Thea. Gracelyn held out the phone with shaking hands. I need you to hear what they said. Before tomorrow. Before the test, Jane took the phone carefully. Play the first one. The recording started with Thea's voice, clear and cold, despite the phone's small speaker. The date stamp showed 3 nights before the wedding. Tomorrow we destroy her completely. Opal's voice responded, excited and cruel. The fake ultrasound looks perfect. The technician you paid did amazing work. She'll believe anything. She always has. That's what makes her so easy to manipulate. Do you really think she'll believe Logan got me pregnant? She'll believe whatever we tell her, especially if we stage it right. The key is shock. Don't give her time to think. Just deliver the news and watch her implode. Laughter. Both of them laughing like this was a game. Logan felt bile rise in his throat. Jane's face had gone completely white. But the recording continued. What about after? Opal asked. What if she asks for proof? That's why we have the fake ultrasound. And if she pushes, we'll say the test is too dangerous. By the time anyone figures out there's no baby, she'll be so destroyed she won't be able to fight back. How long do we keep up the pregnancy lie?
4 months.
Then we'll stage a miscarriage. Something traumatic that we can blame on Jane's violent behavior. She attacked you. The stress caused you to lose the baby. It's perfect. More laughter, more planning, more casual cruelty. Jane stopped the recording with shaking hands.
There are more.
Gracelyn nodded miserably. Lots more. I recorded everything. I was scared, but I didn't know how to make them stop. Logan knelt beside them, his mind reeling. How long have you been recording? Since the wedding planning started. Grandma Thea was saying mean things about Jane when she thought I couldn't hear. I wanted proof that she was lying. So I started recording. Play more, Jane said. Her voice was hollow. I need to hear all of it. The next recording was from 2 weeks before the wedding. Opal practicing her pregnancy announcement, testing different voices, different emotional deliveries. I'm so sorry, Jane, but I'm pregnant with his child. Then laughing. No, that's too apologetic. More confident. Like I'm doing her a favor by telling her another recording from a week before. Thea coaching Opal on symptoms to fake, pregnancy signs to research, how to answer questions about timing and doctors. If she asks about morning sickness, say you've been hiding it. If she asks about weight gain, say it's too early to show. If she asks about the father, cry. Tears stop questions better than answers, recording after recording, all revealing the same truth. There was no pregnancy. There never had been. Opal had planned the wedding destruction with Thea's help, creating an elaborate lie designed to hurt Jane as deeply as possible. But there was more. Recordings from after the wedding. Opal and Thea discussing the custody case, planning which lies to tell, coaching each other on court testimony, discussing the forged psychiatric records, joking about how easy it was to fake Jane's mental health history. She actually believed she was hospitalized. Can you imagine? She's so broken she can't even remember what's real anymore. One recording made Logan's blood run cold. Opal discussing her plans for Logan. Once Jane is completely destroyed, I'll seduce him for real. He'll be vulnerable, grieving. I'll be the understanding shoulder to cry on. Then the pregnancy lie becomes reality, and I get everything. The man, the money, the life Jane thought she'd have. Thea's response was approving. Good, that's good. But wait until she's completely broken first. If there's any fight left in her, she might find a way to expose us. The recordings went on. 20 minutes of evidence. 20 minutes of careful, calculated cruelty. 20 minutes that proved Logan had been innocent all along. When the last one finished, silence filled the cottage like a physical presence. Logan sat back against the wall, his face in his hands. Jane stared at nothing, processing what they'd just heard. Gracelyn broke the silence with her small, scared voice. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Jane pulled the child close. Why didn't you, sweetheart? Grandma Thea said if I told, she'd make sure I never saw you again. She said she'd send me away where nobody could find me. She said I'd disappear and you'd think I didn't love you anymore. The child's voice broke. I was scared. I didn't want to disappear. You were protecting yourself, Jane said, her voice thick with tears. That's not your fault. None of this is your fault. Logan looked up finally, his eyes red. We need to call the police. Right now. No, Jane said. What? Jane, these recordings prove everything. I know what they prove. Jane stood carefully, Graceland still clinging to her. But we do this right. We get copies made first, put them somewhere safe. Then we call the police. I won't risk Thea destroying the only evidence we have. Logan nodded slowly. She was right. They needed to be smart about this. He spent the next hour making secure copies of every recording, uploading them to encrypted cloud storage, emailing them to his lawyers, creating physical backups. Jane held Graceland the entire time, whispering reassurances, promising safety. When Logan finished, he looked at Jane across the dim cottage. They'd lost 8 months to lies, 8 months of pain and separation and believing the worst of each other. 8 months of her pregnancy spent alone, because of an elaborate, vicious hoax. I'm sorry, Jane said suddenly. Logan's head snapped up. What? For not believing you? For pushing you away? For spending 8 months hating you for something you didn't do? Her voice cracked. I'm so sorry. Jane, no. You had no reason to believe me. They created perfect proof, but you kept showing up. You kept fighting for us even when I treated you like you were my enemy. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You fixed my house and brought me food and refused to leave, and all I did was hurt you back. Logan crossed the room, kneeling in front of her. You were protecting yourself from what you thought was betrayal. I don't blame you for that. I should have known better. I should have known you couldn't do something like that. They fooled everyone. The judge, the lawyers, all those wedding guests. This wasn't your failure. It was their crime. Graceland looked between them, her young face solemn. Are you going to get married now? The question hung in the air. Jane and Logan looked at each other, really looked at each other for the first time in months. I don't know, Jane said honestly. We have a lot to work through. A lot of broken pieces to put back together. But we'll try, Logan added softly. If Jane wants to, we'll try. I want to, Jane whispered. I'm terrified, but I want to. Graceland smiled, the first real smile she'd shown in months. Good. As dawn broke over the cottage, the three of them sat together, processing everything that had been revealed. The recordings sat safely copied and stored. Proof of the lies, evidence of the conspiracy, ammunition for the war they were about to wage. Tomorrow, they'd call the police. Tomorrow, they'd start the legal process to bring Thea and Opal to justice. Tomorrow, they'd begin rebuilding what had been destroyed, but tonight they simply sat together. Jane, Logan, and Graceland, a family that had been fractured by lies, beginning to heal with truth. Outside, the first light of morning painted the sky. Inside, for the first time in 8 months, there was hope. Chapter 8. The Unraveling. Jane called the police at 7 in the morning. 2 detectives arrived within the hour, professional and serious-faced, as they listened to the recordings. Their expressions changed as the evidence played, shifting from skeptical to shocked to grimly determined. This is conspiracy to commit fraud, at minimum, the lead detective said. Possibly more charges once we investigate fully. We'll need the original phone as evidence. Graceland handed it over reluctantly. You'll make sure they can't hurt Jane anymore? We'll do everything we can, the detective promised. They arrested Opal first. Logan insisted on being there, standing outside the penthouse with police while they took her into custody. She screamed the entire way down to the police car, crying about miscarriage risk, about stress endangering her baby, about false accusations. Check her medical records, Logan said coldly. You'll find there is no baby. There never was. The officers took her anyway, her protests fading as the car pulled away. Thea's arrest happened an hour later. She went quietly, dignified even in handcuffs, shooting Logan a look of pure hatred as they led her past. This isn't over. Yes, Logan said. It is. Bail hearing was set for the following morning. Logan's lawyers filed immediate motions for custody transfer, submitting the recordings as evidence of child endangerment. The judge reviewed them in chambers, emerged looking disgusted, and granted emergency custody to Jane on the spot. The child will remain with Ms. Thompson pending full investigation. Supervised visitation for Ms. Opal will be suspended indefinitely. Just like that, Graceland was safe. But the aftermath was complicated. A friend of Logan's who did basic accounting volunteered to review Thea's finances, working nights after his regular job. It took months of painstaking work, sifting through documents Jane had saved from her father's papers, cross-referencing bank statements she'd managed to obtain. The picture that emerged was incomplete. They could prove some theft, maybe 8 million of the 14 they suspected. The rest was hidden in offshore accounts, shell companies, investments they couldn't trace without resources they didn't have, properties transferred legally through trusts, money that was technically accessible, but proving it was stolen was another matter entirely. Criminal. Charges were filed based on what they could prove. Conspiracy, embezzlement of the traceable funds, perjury, child endangerment. But Thea's lawyers were expensive, and Logan's volunteer accountant couldn't match their expertise. "We might not get everything back," Logan admitted one night. "Even if she's convicted, a lot of that money is probably gone forever. Hidden too well." Jane absorbed this quietly. "So I just accept that she gets to keep some of what she stole? Unless we can hire a real forensic team, yes. And that costs more than I have." "How much more?" Logan showed her the estimate. $200,000 minimum for the kind of investigation that might uncover everything. Money neither of them possessed. Through it all, Jane and Logan existed in strange limbo. They were having a baby together. They were raising Graceland together, but they weren't together, not really. Too much had been broken. Too much pain lingered between them. Logan moved into the cottage's guest room to help with Graceland, giving Jane space while staying close. They cooked meals together in awkward silence. They made decisions about the child's therapy, her schooling, her healing. They were partners in survival, but not in love. Not yet. One night, 3 weeks after the arrests, Jane found Logan on the porch at midnight. He sat on the steps he'd repaired months ago, staring at the dark lake. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Thinking too much?" Jane sat beside him, leaving careful space between them.
About what?
"About how we lost 8 months. About how I should have fought harder to prove my innocence sooner. About how different things might have been if Graceland had shown us those recordings at the beginning." "You can't think like that." "Why not?" Logan turned to her, his face anguished. "Our baby's first months of existence, we weren't together. You were pregnant and alone because I couldn't prove something that should have been obvious. You did everything you could. It wasn't enough. I watched you suffer. I watched you lose Graceland temporarily. I watched you hate me, and I couldn't stop any of it." His voice broke. "Do you understand what that felt like? Knowing you were in pain because of accusations I couldn't disprove." Jane's heart cracked. "I blamed you for things you didn't do. That's not your failure. It's mine." "No, yes," she cut him off. "I should have believed you. I should have trusted what I knew about you instead of what they told me. But Logan, they were so convincing. The ultrasound, the timing, the way Opal played the victim. It all fit together perfectly, because they planned it perfectly. Exactly. So stop torturing yourself for not fighting hard enough, and let me stop torturing myself for not believing you. We both did the best we could with what we knew." Logan looked at her for a long moment. "When did you get so wise?" "When I had to survive 8 months of hell." Jane smiled sadly. "Pain teaches things comfort never will." They sat in silence, listening to crickets and distant water sounds. Finally, Logan spoke again. "What happens now with us?" "I don't know," Jane admitted. "I'm carrying your child. We're raising Graceland together. But I don't know if we can go back to what we were." "I don't want to go back," Logan said. "What we were before was based on incomplete information. We were building a life without knowing there were people actively trying to destroy it. So what do you want?" He turned to face her fully. "I want to start over. Not pretend the last 8 months didn't happen, but acknowledge them and choose to move forward anyway. I want to build something real with you, with full honesty, with both of us knowing exactly what we're choosing." Jane's breath caught. "That sounds terrifying." "It is terrifying. But staying in this limbo is worse. What if I can't forgive myself for not believing you? What if I can't forgive myself for not proving it sooner? Logan countered. We'll be two guilty people building a life together. Seems fitting, Jane laughed despite herself. That's a terrible sales pitch. I'm not good at this. Logan took her hand carefully. But I love you. I've loved you since before this nightmare started, and I loved you through every awful minute of it. I'll love you tomorrow and next week and next year, whether you can love me back or not. I never stopped loving you, Jane whispered. I hated you and loved you at the same time, and it was awful. So what do we do about it? Jane looked at their joined hands, at this man who'd fixed her porch and brought her groceries and refused to leave even when she screamed at him to go. We try slowly. We take it one day at a time and see if we can rebuild what they destroyed. I can do slow. Can you? You're not exactly patient. I waited 8 months, Logan pointed out. I can wait as long as you need. Jane leaned against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of him, the solidity. For 8 months, she denied herself this comfort out of self-protection. Now, with truth finally exposed, she let herself have it. They sat on the porch until sunrise, not speaking much, just existing together. When Gracelyn woke and found them still there, she smiled. You look like a family, she said. We're working on it, Jane told her. Good, you should keep working. The trial preparations consumed the next months. Opal, released on bail, disappeared for 2 weeks before being found and fitted with an ankle monitor. Thea remained in custody, denied bail after prosecutors argued she was a flight risk with resources to vanish. The pregnancy lie unraveled under investigation. Medical records showed Opal had never been pregnant. The ultrasound was confirmed as fake, created by someone Thea paid under the table. The emergency room visit that cancelled the paternity test had never happened. Every lie was exposed, every manipulation documented. The case against them grew stronger daily. Through it all, Jane's pregnancy progressed. Her belly grew round with life, while her world slowly knitted itself back together. Logan came to every doctor's appointment, his face full of wonder each time they heard the heartbeat. It's a girl, the technician said during the anatomy scan. Logan looked at Jane with tears in his eyes. Another daughter. Another chance to do things right, Jane agreed. They didn't talk about marriage, didn't make grand plans. They just lived each day, learning to trust again, learning to be partners again. Some days were easy. Some days, Jane woke up angry at everything they'd lost and took it out on Logan, who weathered her storms with patience. I hate that we can't get those months back, she said one night after a particularly bad day. So do I. I hate that our baby's first 8 months of life happened during the worst time possible. Ah, baby survived it, Logan said. She's strong because you're strong. How do you always know what to say? I don't. I just say what's true. 4 months after the arrests, sitting in the cottage that had become their home, Logan asked the question Jane had been waiting for. Will you marry me? Jane looked at him, at this man who'd fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. Ask me again after the trial. Why? Because I need to watch them face justice first. I need to see this story end before I can start a new one. Logan nodded. I can wait. I know you can. That's why I'm saying yes. He blinked. Wait, is that a yes? Ask me again after the trial, Jane repeated. And I'll say yes then too. But I need you to know I'm saying yes now, in my heart, even if we don't make it official yet. Logan pulled her close, his hand resting on her pregnant belly. I'll ask you every day until you're ready. You better not, Jane laughed. Once more is plenty. They sat together, planning a future that finally felt possible. Outside, spring was breaking through winter. Inside, hope was breaking through pain. The worst wasn't over. The trial still loomed. Healing would take years, not months. But they were facing it together, and that made all the difference. Gracelyn found them cuddled on the couch and squeezed between them without asking. When's dinner? Soon, Jane promised. Can we have pancakes? For dinner? Why not? You're having a baby. Pregnant ladies get whatever they want. Logan laughed. I'm not sure that's how it works. It should be, Graceland said firmly. So they made pancakes for dinner, the three of them working together in the small kitchen. Flour got everywhere. Graceland snuck chocolate chips when she thought they weren't looking. Logan burned the first batch. It was chaotic and messy and imperfect. It was family. And for the first time in 8 months, Jane looked at her life and didn't see ruins. She saw foundation, something solid to build on. The rest would come. Justice would come. Healing would come. But tonight, there was enough. Chapter 9. The Final Reckoning. The trial began on a Tuesday in late autumn, when Jane was so pregnant she could barely fit behind the witness table. 9 months along, ready to deliver any day, but refusing to miss this. She'd waited too long to watch justice finally arrive. The courtroom was packed with media, spectators, people who'd followed the case and wanted to see the conclusion. Jane sat in the front row with Logan beside her, his hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. Graceland stayed home with Logan's sister, spared from witnessing what would unfold today. Thea entered in prison orange, her hair still perfect despite incarceration, her face arranged in an expression of wounded dignity. She didn't look at Jane, didn't acknowledge her existence, as though ignoring her stepdaughter might somehow make this all disappear. Opal was already there, brought from a different facility where she'd been serving her sentence. She'd taken a plea deal 3 months earlier, agreeing to testify against Thea in exchange for reduced charges. 4 years with parole eligibility after 18 months. Not enough in Jane's opinion, but better than nothing. The prosecutor was a sharp woman named Catherine Mills, who'd built her career on financial crimes. She stood for opening arguments with the confidence of someone holding a winning hand. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about systematic, calculated destruction of a young woman's life for financial gain. Thea Thompson married Jane's father and immediately began siphoning his wealth. When he died, she continued stealing from Jane's inheritance while posing as a caring stepmother. When Jane became engaged, threatening Thea's control, she orchestrated an elaborate hoax to destroy that relationship and drive Jane into isolation. The evidence will show years of financial manipulation, fraud, and psychological abuse, all designed to maintain power over Jane and her inheritance. Mills laid out the case methodically. Forensic accountants testified about $14 million in theft. Digital experts confirmed the fake ultrasound creation. The investigator who'd interviewed the supposed medical facility that treated Opal for pregnancy complications testified it never happened. Then came the recordings, played in full for the jury. Graceland's small phone speaker magnified through the courtroom sound system, broadcasting Thea and Opal's voices planning Jane's destruction with casual cruelty. Jane watched the jury's faces change as they listened. Shock, disgust, horror. Several jurors looked at Thea with open revulsion. Thea's defense attorney tried objecting, claiming the recordings were obtained illegally by a minor without consent. The judge overruled. The child was protecting herself from psychological abuse in her own home. The recordings are admissible. On the second day, Jane took the stand. She'd prepared for this, rehearsed with Catherine Mills, knew what questions were coming. But sitting there, swollen with pregnancy, facing the woman who'd poisoned her entire adult life, all preparation fled. Ms. Thompson, please tell the jury about your relationship with the defendant. Jane's voice shook at first, then steadied. Thea married my father when I was 7. He died when I was 19, leaving everything in trust with Thea as administrator. I thought she loved me. I thought she was protecting me. I didn't realize until recently that she'd been stealing from me for years while making me financially dependent on her approval. When did you become aware of the theft? After my wedding was destroyed. After I'd lost everything and found my father's cottage. He'd left letters warning me about her, but I never saw them until I had nowhere else to go. Catherine walked her through the timeline. The engagement, the wedding planning, the interruption, the custody battle. The recordings. Every awful moment laid bare for the jury to witness. Thea's attorney cross-examined aggressively. "Ms. Thompson, isn't it true you violently attacked Ms. Opal at your wedding?" "I grabbed her after she lied about being pregnant with my fiancé's child." "You grabbed her, or you attacked her?" "I was defending myself against a lie designed to destroy my life." "That sounds like justification for violence." "That sounds like a natural response to psychological warfare," Jane shot back. "She fabricated a pregnancy, created fake medical documents, and announced it at my wedding specifically to cause maximum damage. If I'd done nothing, you'd be calling me weak. I did something, and you're calling me violent. There's no winning with people like you." The attorney's face darkened. "People like me. People who twist every action to fit a narrative. Just like Thea taught you to do." The judge sustained an objection, but Jane saw several jurors nodding. They understood what she was saying. The cross-examination continued for hours. Jane's back ached. Her feet were swollen. The baby pressed against her ribs, making it hard to breathe. But she answered every question, refused to be intimidated, held her ground. When she finally stepped down, Logan was there to help her to her seat. "You were incredible," he whispered. "I was angry. You were honest." "That's better." On the third day, Opal testified via video from prison. She looked smaller than Jane remembered, diminished by incarceration and guilt. Her voice was quiet as she confirmed everything. "My mother planned the whole thing. The fake pregnancy, the wedding interruption, timing it for maximum humiliation. She said if we destroyed Jane completely, we'd have full access to the inheritance. I went along with it because she's my mother, and I was afraid of her." "Afraid how?" Catherine prompted. "Afraid she'd turn on me next. Afraid she'd cut me off financially. Afraid she'd make me disappear the way she threatened to make Gracelyn disappear." Opal's voice broke. "I know that's not an excuse. I did terrible things. I hurt Jane, who never did anything to me except exist. I hurt Gracelyn, who trusted me. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want the truth on record." The defense tried to paint Opal as an unreliable witness with motive to lie, but her testimony matched the recordings perfectly. There was no escaping the evidence. On the fourth day, Thea took the stand in her own defense. She wore a borrowed suit, her makeup perfect, her performance flawless. She denied everything with such conviction that Jane almost believed her herself. "I loved Jane like my own daughter. Everything I did was to protect her from making terrible choices. Logan was wrong for her. Everyone could see that. Yes, I controlled her finances, but only because her father asked me to. The trust was structured to keep her safe until she matured." "What about the recordings?" Catherine asked on cross-examination. "Taken out of context. Edited, perhaps." "My daughter was coerced into recording private conversations. The recordings were examined by 3 independent experts. None found evidence of editing. Then they were wrong," Thea said calmly. "Or my daughter lied about what was said before and after the recordings." "You're claiming the recordings are real, but meaningless?" "I'm claiming that private conversations between a mother and daughter shouldn't be used to destroy a family." It was masterful deflection, but Catherine was ready. "Let's talk about the $14 million you stole from Jane's inheritance." "I managed it." "Management isn't theft. You transferred property into your name. You purchased assets with trust money and claimed them as personal. You forged documents to access funds you had no legal right to touch. I had full legal authority as trustee, not to enrich yourself at the beneficiary's expense." Catherine produced document after document, each one showing clear theft. "Explain this property purchased with trust funds, but deeded solely to you." Thea's mask finally cracked. Just for a moment, Jane saw rage flash across her face before she smoothed it away. "That was a mistake. Paperwork error. 27 paperwork errors. All in your favor?" Silence. "Answer the question, Mrs. Thompson. More silence." Thea's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The jury had seen her caught. On the 5th day, during closing arguments, Jane felt the first contraction. She gripped Logan's hand, breathing through it, refusing to leave until this was finished. But her body had other plans. Halfway through Catherine's summary, Jane's water broke. Clear fluid pooling beneath her chair, impossible to hide. The entire courtroom noticed simultaneously. "Your Honor," Catherine said quickly, "I request a brief recess." But Jane stood before the judge could respond. One hand on Logan's arm, the other on her massive belly. "No, finish, please." Catherine looked at her with concern. Logan whispered urgently, "Jane, we need to go. Now." "Not until this is done." Jane's voice carried across the silent courtroom. "I've waited too long. I'm not leaving until the jury gets this case." The judge looked torn between procedure and common sense. "Finally, make it quick, Miss Mills." Catherine raced through the rest of her closing, hitting every key point in record time. The defense attorney waived his right to further argument, probably wisely. The judge charged the jury, and they were dismissed to deliberate. "Now," Logan said firmly, "we're going to the hospital." The contractions were 5 minutes apart by the time they reached the emergency room. Jane was admitted immediately, her labor progressing fast. Logan stayed beside her through every contraction, every push, every agonizing moment. 6 hours later, their daughter was born. Tiny, perfect, with Logan's eyes and Jane's stubborn chin. They named her Claire, after Jane's mother. Jane held her newborn daughter and wept, for joy, for relief, for the sheer miracle of life emerging from so much death and destruction. Claire had survived everything, had grown in Jane's body during the worst months of her life, and emerged healthy anyway. "She's strong," Logan said, tears streaming down his face. "Just like her mother." "She's ours," Jane whispered. "Finally, something that's completely ours." The jury reached a verdict 36 hours later. Jane was still in the hospital, but she insisted on being present. Against doctor's orders, she checked herself out, Logan carrying Claire in a car seat, and they went back to the courthouse. The courtroom was even more packed than before. News had spread about Jane giving birth during trial. The media loved the symbolism. New life born while seeking justice for old wrongs. Thea sat at the defense table, looking smaller somehow, as though the weight had diminished her. She glanced back when Jane entered with Logan and the baby, and for just a second, something like recognition flickered in her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by cold emptiness, as the jury reached a verdict. The judge asked, "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, how do you find?" "Not guilty." "On the charge of embezzlement?" "Guilty on counts 1 through 4, not guilty on counts 5 through 9. Jane's heart sank. The counts they'd lost were the biggest ones, the offshore accounts, the properties they couldn't fully trace. On the charge of perjury? Guilty. More charges followed. Some guilty, some not guilty. The jury believed the recordings, believed Jane's testimony, but without complete financial evidence, they couldn't convict on everything. Reasonable doubt on the complicated money trail. Jane held Claire close, the victory feeling hollow. Justice, yes, but incomplete justice. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Thea stood to hear her fate without visible emotion. "Mrs. Thompson, you systematically destroyed your stepdaughter's life for personal gain. However, the financial crimes proven represent only a portion of what was alleged. This court sentences you to 12 years in prison, with possibility of parole after 8. 12 years. Not 28, not life. Thea would be out while still in her 60s, still with time to disappear, with whatever money remained hidden." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Catherine Mills looked frustrated. Logan's hand tightened on Jane's. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I thought we had more." "You did what you could," Jane said, but disappointment sat heavy in her chest. The bailiffs moved to take her away, but Thea turned, looking directly at Jane for the first time since the trial began. "You were always weak," she said, her voice carrying across the courtroom, "just like your pathetic mother." Jane stood slowly, Claire in her arms, Logan at her side. She walked to the railing separating them, looked Thea in the eyes and smiled. "My mother taught me love. You taught me survival. I chose love. That's why I won and you lost everything. Thea lunged toward her, rage finally breaking through her control. Bailiffs grabbed her, restraining her as she screamed threats and curses. They dragged her backward toward the doors, her voice echoing off the marble walls. Jane didn't flinch. She just held her baby, felt Logan's arm around her, and watched Thea disappear through the doors into a future of concrete and bars. When the courtroom doors closed, cutting off Thea's screams, Jane felt something release inside her chest. A weight she'd carried so long, she'd forgotten it was there. Freedom, not just from Thea, but from fear, from doubt, from the constant weight of manipulation and control. She looked at Logan. He looked back with so much love in his eyes. It hurt. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Jane looked down at Claire, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos around her. Looked at Logan, this man who'd fought beside her through everything. Thought of Gracelyn waiting at the cottage, probably anxious for news. "Yes," she said. "Let's go home." Chapter 10. Chosen Family. 1 year later, everything was different but not perfect. The cottage had been partially renovated with the money they could afford. Some rooms were finished, others still showed water damage they'd get to eventually. The porch where Logan had fixed steps now held comfortable chairs purchased second-hand. The garden Jane's father had once tended bloomed again, though more weeds than flowers most days. Money was tight. The inheritance that had been recovered, about 6 million of the original 14, was tied up in ongoing legal proceedings. Appeals, asset recovery attempts, lawyers' fees that never stopped coming. Jane worked part-time from home doing freelance editing. Logan had taken a second job on weekends. Claire was walking now, toddling around on unsteady legs, reaching for everything with determined hands. She had Logan's smile and Jane's fierce independence. Gracelyn adored her, playing the protective big sister, though some days she retreated into herself, the trauma surfacing in nightmares and sudden fears. Therapy helped, but it was expensive. Both individual and family sessions, working through trauma that insurance only partially covered. Some weeks they could barely afford the co-pays. Jane had postponed her own sessions twice this month to ensure Gracelyn could keep going. They fought sometimes. Real fights, not about the past, but about money, about parenting decisions, about Logan's tendency to still try fixing everything himself, and Jane's tendency to push him away when things got hard. They were learning, but learning wasn't linear. The other night, Jane had thrown a plate during an argument about whether they could afford to fix the leaking bathroom pipe themselves or needed a plumber. Logan had walked out and didn't come back until morning. They'd apologized, talked it through, moved forward. But the plate remained broken in the trash, a reminder that healing wasn't a straight line. Opal had been released on parole 2 months ago. She'd called once, asking to see Gracelyn. Jane had said no, but the decision haunted her. Was she protecting Gracelyn appropriately, or denying her a relationship she might want someday? The therapist said there was no right answer, which Jane found profoundly unhelpful. They'd learned that Thea had moved most of the missing money to accounts in the Cayman Islands years ago. Without hundreds of thousands for international investigators, that money was effectively gone. Jane would never see it again. That chapter was closed, not with resolution, but with acceptance. That evening, after the girls were finally asleep, Logan found Jane crying quietly in the bathroom. "Hey," he said softly. "Talk to me." "I'm tired," Jane whispered. "I'm so tired of fighting. The lawyers called today. Thea's appealing again. They need me to testify next month. Can you say no? And risk her sentence getting reduced?" "No." She wiped her eyes. "I'm trapped by my own need for justice that I'll never fully get." Logan sat on the bathroom floor beside her. "We could stop. Drop the appeals fight. Let whatever happens happen. And let her win more than she already has." "Is she winning?" "She's in prison. We have the girls, we have each other. We're broke, Logan. We had another overdraft fee this week. Gracelyn had a panic attack at school yesterday. This doesn't feel like winning. It feels like surviving," Logan agreed. "But maybe that's what we get. Not the fairy tale, just survival and each other. That's depressing. It's realistic, he took her hand. I love you. I'm committed to this. But I'm also exhausted and scared and not sure I'm doing any of it right. Jane looked at him. This man who'd proven himself over and over but still struggled daily. I threw a plate at you last week. We're working on it. What if we can't fix this? What if we're too broken? And then we're two broken people raising two kids and doing our best. There are worse things. Later, when they'd moved to the dock, Logan asked the question she didn't expect. Do you regret staying with me? Jane looked at him, startled. What? We could have co-parented separately. You didn't have to build a life with someone who reminds you of the worst time in your life. You don't remind me of the worst time. Thea does. I'm tied to it. Every time you look at me, you remember the wedding, the accusations, the 8 months of hell. Jane couldn't deny it. Yes, sometimes I look at you and I'm right back in that cathedral. But other times, I look at you and see the man who fixed my porch badly, but kept trying, who slept in his truck outside my cottage, who believed in us when I couldn't. That's not the most romantic reason to stay together. No, but it's honest. They sat in silence. Then Logan said, I was going to ask you to marry me tonight. I have a ring in my pocket. Jane's heart jumped. Was? I don't know if I should. Marriage feels like promising everything will be okay, and I can't promise that. We might struggle forever. That's definitely not romantic, but it's honest. So I'm asking differently. Will you marry me, knowing it won't fix anything? Knowing we'll still struggle, still fight. Will you marry me anyway? Jane looked at him, this imperfect man offering an imperfect life. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. It's the only one I've got. When's the wedding? Because my answer is yes, but I want it soon before we lose our nerve. Logan stared at her. You're serious? After everything we've survived, I'm not letting a realistic proposal scare me off. Jane held out her hand. Put the ring on! He did, his hands shaking. The ring was simple, probably all he could afford. I love you, he said, even though I'm not sure I know how to do this right. I love you too, even though I'm terrified we're making a mistake. They planned it over the next weeks, but nothing went smoothly. The date they wanted wasn't available. The restaurant couldn't accommodate them. Their friend who was going to officiate got sick twice. The morning of the wedding, Jane woke with doubts, screaming. What if this was wrong? What if they were forcing something too broken to work? She almost called it off before Gracelyn appeared in the doorway. You look pretty, the child said. Jane looked down at her simple dress. Thank you, sweetheart. Are you going to marry Logan today? I think so. I'm scared. Gracelyn climbed onto the bed. Mama Opal said getting married is stupid and people always leave anyway. Jane's heart hurt. When did she tell you that? When she called last week. You were in the shower, so Logan let her talk to me. Jane hadn't known about this. Another complication. What do you think about marriage? I think if you're scared but doing it anyway, that's braver than not being scared. Gracelyn leaned against her. You're the bravest person I know. I'm really not. You are, though. You're scared all the time, but you keep going. The morning of the wedding, a letter arrived. Thick envelope, prison postmark, Thea's handwriting. Jane held it for a moment, feeling its weight. Gracelyn appeared beside her. What is it? Letter from Thea. Are you going to read it? Jane looked at the envelope, this final attempt at control. Then she walked to the fireplace and threw it in. She had 26 years to say true things to me, Jane said as it burned. I'm not giving her one more minute. The wedding that afternoon was imperfect in every way. Jane wore a simple white dress with a small stain she tried to hide. Logan wore a suit that didn't quite fit. Gracelyn's flower crown kept falling off. Claire screamed through half the ceremony because she was overtired. They stood on the dock as the sun descended. Their friend Marcus officiated, reading from notes on his phone because he'd forgotten to print them. The vows were simple but imperfect. Logan cried and forgot half of what he'd planned to say. Jane's voice shook when she promised to choose him every day. When they kissed, Claire's screaming reached a crescendo, and Logan nearly fell into the water. saved only by Jane grabbing his arm. Graceful, she muttered. That's me, Prince Charming. Their guests laughed. The moment was perfect in its imperfection. Later, after dinner that ran over budget, Jane found Gracelyn crying in her room. Mama Opal called again. She said she's filing for visitation rights now that she's out. Jane's stomach dropped. Another complication, another fight. This was supposed to be her wedding night, and instead she was dealing with ongoing trauma and legal threats. We'll handle it, Jane said, holding Gracelyn close. Whatever she tries. What if everything you can isn't enough? Then we'll survive anyway. We're good at surviving. It wasn't the reassurance a child needed, but it was the truth. That night, lying beside Logan, Jane thought about everything unresolved. The missing money they'd never recover. The appeals that would drag on for years. Opal's potential custody fights. The financial struggles that wouldn't end any time soon. What are you thinking? Logan asked. That we just got married and I'm already stressed about money. And Opal in the bathroom. Welcome to marriage. This isn't how it's supposed to be. We've never been easy, Logan pointed out. Why start now? What if it's not enough? Then we'll figure it out as we go. Jane closed her eyes, feeling the weight of all that remained uncertain. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also more days when looking at Logan reminded her of strength, of choosing to keep going when stopping would have been easier. She thought about Gracelyn's words. You're scared all the time, but you keep going. Maybe that was what bravery really was. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. I'm glad we did this, Jane said. Even though I'm terrified. Me too. Outside, wind rustled through the trees. Inside, their daughters slept. Between them, love that was imperfect and complicated and real. Jane let herself feel it fully. Not peace, exactly. Not the absence of struggle, but something stronger. Choice, commitment, the decision to keep trying even when the outcome remained uncertain. Tomorrow would bring new problems. They'd fight about money again within the week. The legal battles would continue. The trauma wouldn't magically disappear. They'd make mistakes as parents, as partners, as people still learning how to trust after betrayal. But tonight, there was this. 4 people who belonged to each other. Not because it was easy or perfect, but because they chose it. Every single day they chose it. And sometimes, Jane thought, as she drifted towards sleep, choice was the strongest foundation of all. Not love that conquered everything, but love that kept choosing despite everything. It wasn't the ending she dreamed of. But it was real, and real, she was learning, mattered more than perfect.